Hey, this is Brent Arnold, and today I want to talk about Flash Professional CS5, and specifically we're going to cover Air for Android workflows in this video, and then the next video will show you how to install it onto the device. So if you came into Flash CS5, which came out a year ago, you're familiar with the iOS stuff that came with it, and then towards the middle of last year they released a Flash extension for Air for Android, and so you may have seen that. And they've also recently we've updated I say we, but I don't work for Adobe. Anyway, they've improved the iOS performance and packaging, and so Flash CS5.5 really is the culmination of a lot of effort, of a lot of work that Adobe's put into it so they can create Android and iOS products. So it's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited. Now what I'm doing here, if you haven't already installed Flash CS5.5, make sure you do that, and then once you've installed it, go ahead and open it, and let's see, wait, well, what, oh, sorry about that, I guess I left that open. Okay, so when you open it for the first time, you see a number of things, and a lot of this will look familiar from previous the Flash CS5 version. Let's go ahead and choose Air for Android. Now what this does is it opens up into kind of a default Android settings. So for example, if I look over here, it's just set to 24 frames per second. You can obviously change that. It's not a requirement. You can do it whatever you'd like. People are able to get 30, 40, even 60 frames per second. The size, again, this is kind of a standard Android phone size. You can certainly change that if you'd like. If you're doing an app for, let's say, like a tablet, so the Motorola Zoom, that would be 1280 by 800. So you would adjust that here. For now, let's go ahead and let's just add a few things to the stage. I'm going to go ahead and so you can see everything. And this isn't really a tutorial on how to draw, but I'll just put some text. Brent is the best ever. Thanks for sharing this code and tutorials. All right, now you're welcome. It's no problem. One thing, I want to go ahead and press V, and then I'm going to select the text, and then I'm going to change the font size because obviously 12-point font is not going to fit very well. So I'm just kind of set this up here, maybe make it 2 lines. Anyway, this is just kind of, I'm just putting stuff on the screen. Now, one thing to keep in mind, we can use components. The only thing to keep in mind is that, and I've already said that, mind. Keep in mind, don't forget. So the components that come with Flash Professional CS5.5 are really designed for the web. And so at the moment, you'll need to really create your own buttons and other interface things. And there are people out there that have started to create mobile components. But you can certainly work with things like, the standard simple button, things like a checkbox, radio buttons, stuff like that. But the only concern, and let me zoom in here, I'm going to press Command 2, Command 3, or Control 3. This kind of sets it up, zooming in. The only thing is, you can use these components, but they're not going to be sized for the mobile touch interaction. Now, for this video, we're not going to worry about it. I just want to get some things out here just so you can show it. All right, let's go ahead and save this. Go ahead and choose Save. And I'm going to call this Simple Android App. And I'll go ahead and replace this. I had kind of messed with some other stuff earlier. All right, so we've got our simple app, nothing big. And at this point, let's go ahead and talk about the settings. So go ahead and on the right where it says Air for Android, go ahead and choose that little wrench symbol. And let's talk about these settings. So first thing, we have our output file name, and then we also have our app name, and we can change this, and maybe I'll just call this simple Android. And then here we have the app ID, and this is referenced so that when you upload it to the market or app store, you're referencing a unique app ID so that when you do updates and things, it's associated for that app. The version number can help with when you post new versions. Version label can be just kind of your own information. Aspect ratio, right now we're set up at 480 by 800, so that would be portrait. You could always do landscape. If you set it to landscape, you want to make sure you change the stage to match that landscape width, unless you change it in code. So just keep that in mind. Auto will also adjust based on the settings of the stage. Now, full screen, the options for full screen are specifically, if you're familiar with the Android phones, you have a status bar at the top, shows the time and other information. If you want to hide that, you want to select full screen. This next option talks about auto orientation. When you set it up for auto orientation, that means you're going to receive an event if you register for those events when the device changes rotation. So like it goes from portrait to landscape. When you add code to your app to listen for those events, if this is not set, then you won't get those events. So just keep that in mind, and you can check that if you want to use that. Render mode, we talk about CPU, GPU. For the moment, we're just going to leave it with CPU. Basically, if your app is not very graphic intensive, there's not a lot of animations, people have good success using GPU and using bitmaps. There's a lot of things, and that'll be covered in other videos. But for now, we can just kind of keep it at CPU. The included files, this here lists all the files that you want to include in the package. So remember, this is the packager, the Air for Android packager. So if you want to include things like MP3 files or video files or other text files that you want local on the device, you would list those here. Now down here, I know this is cut off. Below it just says publish, cancel, and OK. Can't really see that, but we don't need to worry about that for now. Let's click over to deployment. Now deployment, this talks about the signing certificate, and we'll cover that in the next video. But just kind of give you an overview. The signing certificate is a self-signed, meaning you create it yourself. You can purchase commercial signing certificates, but the problem is the Android market doesn't support commercial certificates. They want it to be at least 25 years of a certificate, like past the year 2033 or whatever. Odd stuff, who knows. Anyway, you don't need a commercial certificate at the moment. Talking about deployment types, we have device release. That's what we're going to do. Emulator release is if you don't have a device but you want to kind of simulate it. You can download the Android SDK, which comes from Google, and you can run that. Debug, and we'll cover that in another tutorial. That's if you want to receive trace information, trace output information from the device. Now, this is an interesting one, get Air runtime. And the options are App Store or Market. Now, currently, these are the two major markets that you can post the apps. Now, what happens is if a user downloads your app from one of these stores and they don't have the Air runtime, then they'll be prompted to download the runtime. Well, if you submit an app to the Amazon App Store, they don't want you to point to the Google market in order to download stuff. So if you know you're going to submit it to the Android market, you would select that. If you do the Amazon App Store, you do that. Whichever you need. For now, we don't need to worry about it. These other two things are really helper functions. They allow you to install the app to the device and then launch it if it's connected. All right, next we have the icons. This are the device icons that show up in the display. You can add them here. And then we have permissions. Now, we'll talk about permissions a bit later, but for now, just keep in mind that with Android, you have to declare permissions for certain types of interactions that you want with the device. So for example, if you want to connect to the internet, you have to enable a permission. If you want to connect to the camera, you have to enable that. Like if you've ever installed an app from Android Market or anywhere, you'll see it'll say, hey, this app wants to connect to the internet, it wants to steal your address, contacts, it wants to, you know, use your camera, stuff like that. You have to set these permissions ahead of time so that when they install the app, they see that and they acknowledge that. Otherwise, if you don't set the permissions, then when you go to access the camera or access these other things, it will fail. You won't get any response, and you won't. It won't work. So if that ever happens, make sure you set your permissions. So for now, we'll just set it with internet. Now this top one here says manually manage permissions and manifest additions in the application descriptor file. What that means is if you were to manually update, like these are specific Android operating system permissions, and you can extend it, you can do quite a bit more. You have to edit this app. It's a -app.xml file, and we'll talk about that in another tutorial, but the point is that you can manage that yourself by opening and editing the .xml file. Well, if you want to do that, when you come back into Flash, and if you were to come back here and change these, it's going to overwrite what you had written. So make sure that if you check this, then you maintain the permissions yourself. But if you uncheck it, then it's going to be maintained here. And if you do anything in the file outside of Flash, it will be overwritten when you come back in. So just keep that in mind. All right, so these are the basic settings. We'll go ahead and click OK. Go ahead and save this. And in fact, let me show you what that app XML file looks like, because I want you to get a sense for what that does. So notice here I am inside of the folder that I'd saved this, and if I right click, and I'm just going to open this, and we'll go ahead and open it with TextMate or whatever you have, you know, on your Windows or Mac. Now notice this file. This has a list of description. It's for the packager, really. It says, hey, this is the name of the SWF, this is the size, you know, it's portrait mode, it's full screen. There are settings here that you can manipulate. But here, notice down here it says Android manifest additions. This is what we're talking about. When we checked that box that says internet permission, this is what it did. It added this permission. Now if you change that, it'll update it here, but if you manage it manually, then you can modify this and it won't override it. So go ahead and close that out. So that's how that works. That relates directly to what we saw within these settings. Let's click back over to the app, and before we deploy it to the device, let's just go ahead and run this so you get a sense for what it looks like, because you can do some things on the desktop to kind of simulate that. So I'm going to go ahead and press Command Return, or you could press Control Enter if you're on a Windows machine. This will go ahead and deploy the SWF, and it'll launch the emulator. Well, it's kind of it's called the ADL. Now ADL stands for, let's see, Arnold drives Lamborghinis. Yeah, no, maybe it stands for Apple doesn't like you. No, that's too many words. ADL. I think it stands for Air Debug Launcher. Yeah, that's what we'll call it. Anyway, this is different than the Air runtime, and it's different than the Flash Player standalone. What it does is it allows you to kind of simulate some things. You can set up things like back and menu and search. If you set up auto orientation, then you can rotate left and right, and then you can get those events to kind of simulate that, so that you can kind of test it before you put it on the device. This in no way replaces a real device. You have to set it up on a real device. Now, notice this is kind of a larger, it fills up quite a bit, and in fact it's extending below here. The reason for that is what we call the DPI, or the dots per inch, or the pixels per inch, where the resolution on a monitor, the DPI is quite a bit different than a device. So the higher the DPI, the more pixels you have per inch within the physical space. And so right now it's much larger here because it has a lower, this is a 72 DPI monitor, and then on the device it's like 160 or whatever. So that's how you do the ADL. Alright, in the next tutorial we're going to show how to deploy to the device from Flash.